Power, success, respect. Those were the things people thought defined my life. To the outside world, I was Aurora, a sharp lawyer with an iron will, someone who had fought her way from nothing to build a name that carried weight in courtrooms. They saw the victories, the confidence, the polished image. They never saw the nights I spent awake, the scars I carried, or the storm I was preparing to unleash. Because behind every smile I wore, there was a secret battle. Behind every win, there was a wound no one noticed. And behind the carefully curated image of a perfect marriage, there was a truth darker than anyone could imagine. This isn't just a story about a woman surviving. It's about transformation. How I went from being quietly dismissed to becoming unstoppable. How the very person who underestimated me would one day regret ever crossing my path. The road to that moment wasn't easy. It was messy, painful, and filled with betrayals that cut deeper than any courtroom defeat. But it led me here, to the story you're about to hear. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to my channel, because what comes next will change the way you see everything. Before I became the woman who brought Vincent to his knees, I was simply Aurora, the devoted wife who believed in loyalty, in building a life together, in enduring hardships as a team. Looking back, I see how naive I was. But back then, my love was blind and my sacrifices endless. I came from a modest family. My parents worked themselves to the bone just to give me an education. I still remember studying at the kitchen table with a flickering lamp while my father counted coins to pay the electricity bill. I promised myself that one day I would rise above poverty, and I did. I became a lawyer against all odds. But even as I built my career, I longed for something simple. Love, stability, and a family of my own. When I met Vincent, I thought my prayers were answered. He was charming, successful, and confident. He told me I was his everything, his anchor. I believed him. For years, I stood by his side, even when it meant putting my dreams second to his ambitions. He traveled often for business, and I trusted him without hesitation. That trust would become my greatest weakness. The cracks started small, barely noticeable. He would mock my job, saying things like, "Your cases are just scraps compared to the empire I'm building." He laughed at my income, belittled the hours I spent at the office, and criticized my appearance when I came home exhausted from work. I tried to brush it off as stress, as the pressure of running a company. I told myself that if I endured a little longer, things would get better. But they didn't. They only grew worse. There were days when Vincent wouldn't come home at all, claiming he was caught up in meetings. I stayed awake at night, staring at the clock, wondering if my husband was safe, if he was eating, if he still cared. I cooked dinners that went cold, cleaned an empty house, and clutched at wedding photos like they could explain the distance growing between us. My friends noticed the change before I did. They whispered, "Aurora, he doesn't treat you right." But I defended him. I told them he was just busy, that he loved me in his own way. I didn't want to admit that my marriage, the very thing I had poured my heart into, was crumbling. Vincent began to weaponize my insecurities. He compared me to other women, women he called more beautiful, more graceful, more fitting for a man of his status. I stood in front of the mirror, questioning every line on my face, every imperfection he pointed out. I starved myself to fit into dresses he found appealing. I painted on smiles to mask the pain of never being enough for the man I loved, and yet Despite all of this, I still tried to be the perfect wife. I attended his business events, smiling on cue while he bragged about his achievements, never once acknowledging mine. I swallowed my pride when he ignored me in public. I told myself that marriage meant sacrifice, that patience was a virtue. But deep inside, I was withering. I will never forget the nights I cried myself to sleep, careful not to let him hear. Because when he did, his response wasn't comfort. It was annoyance. "Stop being dramatic, Aurora. Do you want me to pity you?" Those words cut deeper than any blade. They told me I wasn't even worthy of compassion in his eyes. My family saw me less and less because Vincent thought visiting them was beneath us. He wanted me isolated, dependent only on him. And slowly, I allowed it. I convinced myself that keeping him happy was the only way to keep our marriage alive. I silenced my own voice, ignored my own needs, and became a shadow of the strong woman I once was. But the worst part wasn't the humiliation. It was the loneliness. Living in a grand house with expensive furniture and glittering chandeliers meant nothing when the person you shared it with treated you like a ghost. I wandered through cold hallways, clutching my phone, waiting for messages that never came. I begged for his attention, and in return, I received silence. The irony was cruel. In courtrooms, I fought passionately for justice, giving a voice to the voiceless. Yet in my own home, I was silenced, dismissed, invisible. My clients admired my resilience, my opponents respected my skill, but my husband, the man who vowed to cherish me, saw me as nothing more than a burden. There was a night I nearly gave up on myself. I remember sitting in the bathroom, staring at my reflection with tears blurring my vision. I whispered, "Maybe I am the problem. Maybe I really am worthless." That thought terrified me, because it wasn't mine. It was his voice, seeping into my soul, convincing me to hate myself. But somewhere deep inside, a flicker of strength remained. A memory of my parents working tirelessly so I could have a future. A reminder that I had fought battles before and emerged victorious. That small flame refused to die, no matter how much Vincent tried to snuff it out. And when the truth finally revealed itself, when I discovered the double life he had been living, I realized that all my suffering had not been in vain. It had prepared me. It had sharpened me. It had forged me into a woman who would no longer bow her head in silence. Vincent thought he had broken me, but he had only awakened the storm inside me. If you had seen me then, you might not recognize me now. The woman who once cried herself to sleep has vanished, replaced by someone unshakable, someone who commands every room she enters. My name carries weight in court, my cases make headlines. And my victories are no longer just professional, they are personal. I used to live in Vincent's shadow, shrinking every time he mocked my worth. But after walking away, I made a decision. Never again would I allow anyone to dictate who I was or what I deserved. I poured every ounce of my energy into my practice, taking on cases others were too afraid to touch. Each win became a brick, building the fortress of independence I had always dreamed of. Soon, my reputation spread. Clients came to me not just for legal advice, but for strength, for someone who would stand beside them when the world tried to tear them apart. I was no longer the overlooked wife of a powerful businessman. I was Aurora, the lawyer feared by rivals and admired by allies, But my success wasn't just measured in titles and accolades. I invested wisely, bought a home of my own, one filled not with cold silence, but with warmth, laughter, and the freedom to live by my own rules. I traveled, I reconnected with friends, and for the first time in years, I looked in the mirror and recognized the woman staring back at me. There's something intoxicating about reclaiming your life. Every insult Vincent once hurled at me became fuel. He said I wasn't beautiful enough, so I stopped seeking validation from his shallow eyes. He said I wasn't successful enough, so I built a career that eclipsed anything he could ever boast about. He said I was nothing without him, yet here I stand, stronger without him than I ever was with him. The world sees me now as unstoppable, and in many ways, I am. But what they don't know is that my success came not only from ambition, but from survival. I didn't rise because everything was handed to me. I rose because I had been dragged to the lowest point and clawed my way back. That kind of strength cannot be faked, and it cannot be destroyed. Every day I wake up with a fire inside me, a determination to prove that no betrayal, no humiliation, no man can ever define my worth. And though I rarely think of Vincent, I know he thinks of me. I know he sees my name in the papers, my face on television, my victories celebrated publicly. And I know it must eat away at him, because the woman he once called useless is now the woman he cannot escape. But this is not just a tale of triumph, because no matter how far I've come, ghosts from the past have a way of returning. The stronger I became, the more inevitable it was that Vincent would reappear, desperate, furious, and unwilling to accept the reality he created. My present may be filled with success, but the story doesn't end here. In fact, it's only just beginning. I thought I had closed the chapter of Vincent forever, but life has a cruel sense of humor, because those who once broke you often crawl back when they realize they've lost control. It started with whispers, mutual acquaintances mentioning his downfall, hushed conversations about his business struggles, and the fact that the glamorous woman he once paraded around had quietly disappeared from his life. I pretended not to care. I told myself that his problems were no longer mine, but I knew it was only a matter of time before he tried to force his way back into my world. And then, it happened. One morning, just as I was preparing for a client meeting, there was a knock at my door. At first, I assumed it was a courier or a neighbor, but when I opened it, I froze. Standing there, in an ill-fitting suit, eyes sunken and shoulders slumped, was Vincent. The once confident, arrogant man who strutted into every room with superiority now looked like a shadow of himself. His tie was loose, his shoes scuffed, and the smell of desperation clung to him like a second skin. "Aurora," he said softly, almost pleading. I didn't move. For years, I had dreamed of him begging, but now that it was in front of me, it felt surreal. "What are you doing here, Vincent?" I asked, my voice sharp, my lawyer's tone kicking in automatically. "Please, hear me out," he said, his eyes darting nervously around as if someone might be watching. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside, only because I didn't want the neighbors to witness the pathetic spectacle he was making. He walked in hesitantly, like a guest rather than the man who once shared my home. The silence was thick. Finally, he broke it. "I've made mistakes." "I know that. I was stupid, arrogant. But Aurora, I need you." I laughed bitterly. You need me? Or do you need what I represent? Stability, money, a reputation that isn't in shambles? He flinched at my words. It's not like that. He lied. I realized too late how much you meant to me. That woman. She was nothing. She only wanted what I could give her. When I lost everything, she vanished. But you've always been the one. His words might have broken me once, but now they only fueled my resolve. Don't insult me, Vincent. You didn't come here out of love. You came here because you're drowning, and you think I'll save you. His face twisted with frustration. Aurora, please. You don't understand what I'm going through. The company is falling apart. Investors are pulling out. I can't do this alone. And why should I care? I asked coldly. Because... He hesitated, then dropped his pride. Because I know you still have a claim to half the business. If you walk away now, it's finished. But if you stand with me, maybe, just maybe, we can rebuild. Together. The audacity almost made me laugh. The man who once told me I was useless, who mocked my career, who flaunted his mistress in my face, was now begging me to rescue him. You think I'd return to the same life where you treated me like dirt? You think I'd give up everything I've built just to fix the mess you created? No, Vincent, I don't go backward. His eyes filled with panic. He moved closer, lowering his voice. Aurora, don't do this. I was wrong. I admit it. But we have history, years together. Doesn't that mean anything? Yes, it means something, I replied, my tone icy. It means I wasted years of my life on a man who never deserved me. It means I learned never to make the same mistake twice. He collapsed into the chair across from me, burying his face in his hands. For the first time, I saw him not as the tyrant of my past, but as a broken man, stripped of everything he once valued. But instead of pity, all I felt was clarity. He lifted his head, tears streaking his cheeks. Aurora, I'm begging you, don't take the rest of it from me. Don't destroy me completely. I leaned forward, meeting his desperate gaze. I'm not destroying you, Vincent. You destroyed yourself the moment you underestimated me, the moment you chose betrayal over loyalty, the moment you decided I wasn't worthy. Now, you're living with the consequences. The silence that followed was suffocating. He tried again, softer this time. Is there really no chance for us? None, I said firmly. You showed me who you are, and I believe you. I won't forget it. I won't forgive it. He left that day, shoulders sagging, steps heavy. But I knew it wasn't over. Vincent was desperate, and desperate men rarely give up quietly. He would return, not as a husband seeking reconciliation, but as an adversary trying to claw back what he had lost. And I was ready. The day Vincent returned to my doorstep, looking more like a beggar than the man who once flaunted his wealth, I knew it was only the beginning. His words echoed long after he left. A toxic mix of desperation and arrogance. He wanted me to believe he had changed, that his remorse was genuine. But if there was one thing Vincent taught me in our years together, it was this. He never told the truth unless it benefited him. I couldn't simply reject him and walk away. Not yet. Because men like Vincent are snakes. They slither back into the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. If I wanted to end this war on my terms, I needed to be prepared. That meant testing his resolve, pulling at the threads of his lies, and uncovering everything he was trying to hide. The first test came sooner than expected. 2 days after his pitiful visit, I received an email. Not from him, but from an associate of his, inviting me to a business meeting under the pretense of discussing a possible reconciliation of assets. I almost laughed when I read it. Reconciliation of assets. That was Vincent's way of trying to rope me back into his failing empire without openly begging again. I accepted, not because I had any intention of helping him, but because I wanted to see just how far he would go to deceive me. The meeting took place at a cafe downtown. Vincent arrived looking more polished this time, as though he had scraped together the remnants of his pride. His smile was forced, his handshake clammy. "Aurora," he greeted me as if we were old friends catching up. "I'm glad you came." I sat down across from him, folding my hands calmly on the table. "Let's not waste time, Vincent. What do you want?" He launched into a rehearsed speech about partnerships, legacy, and rebuilding the empire we once shared. I listened quietly, watching the twitch in his jaw, the nervous tapping of his fingers against the cup. He was lying, badly. When he finally paused, I leaned in. "Tell me the truth, Vincent. How bad is it?" His eyes widened for a split second before he covered it with a laugh. "It's not as bad as the rumors make it sound. Just a few setbacks. Nothing I can't handle with the right partner." There it was, the crack I was waiting for. I decided to push. "If that's true, then why were you crying in my living room last week?" The color drained from his face. For a moment, he forgot the mask he was wearing, and I saw the panic in his eyes. Then he recovered, forcing a smirk. "I was emotional. You know how it is, Aurora. Seeing you again after so long, it brought back memories." I almost pitied how pathetic his lies had become. Almost. That meeting told me everything I needed to know. Vincent wasn't just struggling, he was drowning. And when men like him drown, they cling to anyone who might keep them afloat. I refused to be his life raft. But I also knew I couldn't underestimate him. A desperate man is dangerous, and Vincent still had pride to protect. So I began my own quiet investigation. I started with the company records. Vincent was careless with his digital footprint. He always assumed I wasn't interested in his business, that I was too absorbed in my cases to notice. But I knew where to look. Late nights spent combing through public filings, investor reports, and leaked emails painted a damning picture. His company wasn't just struggling, it was collapsing. Debt piled up, investors withdrew, and projects stalled. He was holding it together with duct tape and bravado. But numbers weren't enough. I wanted proof of his lies, the kind that would shatter any illusion he tried to spin in court. So I reached out to a few contacts in the financial world. People who owed me favors, people Vincent had once dismissed as insignificant. They were more than happy to share what they knew. One contact revealed that Vincent had been funneling company funds into personal accounts, likely to fund his mistress's lavish lifestyle. Another mentioned whispers of lawsuits brewing against him for breach of contract. The man who once mocked me for being a lowly lawyer was about to drown in a sea of legal battles he couldn't win. Still, I needed to be careful. If Vincent suspected I was digging, he might lash out in ways that could complicate things. So I tested him again, this time with a calculated move. I called him late one evening, keeping my tone deliberately neutral. "Vincent," I said, "I've been thinking, maybe we should consider a temporary arrangement, something to stabilize things before we finalize the divorce." The silence on the other end was electric. He thought I was wavering, that his manipulation was working. "Aurora, I knew you'd see reason," he said quickly. "I can send over some documents tomorrow. Just something small to sign to show we're on the same page." When the documents arrived, I wasn't surprised. Hidden in the jargon was a clause that would have tied me to his debts, making me partially responsible for his company's downfall. It was his test for me, and he failed miserably. Instead of confronting him immediately, I let him think I was considering it. Meanwhile, I documented everything: emails, contracts, conversations. I wasn't just preparing to defend myself. I was building a case to destroy him. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. Vincent hadn't just betrayed me personally, he had betrayed everyone who trusted him: investors, employees, even friends. He burned every bridge, confident that he could always rebuild. But this time, there would be no rebuilding. Not after I was done with him. Testing him wasn't about giving him another chance. It was about confirming what I already knew. Vincent would never change. He would lie, manipulate, and drag others down with him until the very end. And now, I had the evidence to prove it. The game had shifted. He thought he was luring me back into his trap, but in reality, he had walked straight into mine, and the deeper I dug, the more I realized his empire wasn't just crumbling, it was rotten to the core, and soon I would be the one to bring it all crashing down. After testing Vincent and seeing just how far he would go to manipulate me, I knew I needed more than words and suspicion. If I wanted to end this war once and for all, I had to gather undeniable proof, evidence so strong that even Vincent, with all his arrogance, couldn't wriggle free. In law, evidence is everything. Without it, even the strongest case collapses. And I wasn't about to give him a single chance. The first step was financial. Vincent always underestimated me, thinking I was too absorbed in court cases to understand the intricacies of business. But I had spent years listening to him brag about his empire. I knew the names of his investors, the shell companies he used to shift money, and even the private banker he once flaunted at a gala. He had left a trail without realizing it, and I was going to follow it to the very end. Late nights became my routine again. Not the kind filled with tears like before, but with determination. I pored over public records, tracing transactions that didn't add up. Money was missing from company accounts. Large sums that appeared and disappeared without explanation. When I cross-referenced the dates with his so-called business trips, the picture became clearer. He wasn't traveling for work. He was traveling to keep his mistress in luxury hotels, to fund shopping sprees, to buy jewelry that had never graced my neck. Still, numbers alone weren't enough. I needed witnesses, people who had seen the truth with their own eyes. That's when I reached out to an old acquaintance, a woman who had once worked as Vincent's secretary. She had left the company quietly years ago, pushed out when she became inconvenient for asking too many questions. When I called her, she was hesitant at first, afraid of being dragged back into Vincent's mess. But when I explained what I was doing, her voice softened. "I knew this day would come," she told me. "Vincent always thought he was untouchable. But I saw things, Aurora. I kept copies." Copies. The word alone was like a spark of hope. When we met, she handed me a flash drive, her hands trembling. Inside were emails, receipts, even photographs, proof of Vincent's affair and his misuse of company funds. In one email, he instructed her to book a 5-star suite under a false name for his mistress. In another, he transferred money from the company account to pay for designer clothes. Each file was a nail in the coffin he had built for himself. But I wasn't done. I needed more, and I knew where to look. Vincent had always been careless with technology, convinced that no one could ever outsmart him. I remembered his old laptop, the one he left behind when he upgraded. He probably assumed it was worthless now, but for me, it was a gold mine. When I powered it on, my heart pounded. The machine was slow, outdated, but still functional. I navigated through old folders, and there it was, a hidden file labeled innocuously as Business Reports. Inside were screenshots of conversations with his mistress, photos of them together, and even scanned receipts of lavish gifts. He had kept everything, like trophies of his betrayal, never imagining that one day I would be the one holding them. With every new piece of evidence, my anger hardened into resolve. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. He had stolen years of my life, drained me emotionally, and humiliated me. Now I would make sure he paid for every single sin. I didn't stop at finances or affairs. I dug deeper into his business dealings. Through legal databases, I uncovered lawsuits filed against him, small cases he had quietly settled, hoping no one would notice. But when pieced together, they revealed a pattern of deceit. He cut corners, broke contracts, and bullied smaller companies into submission. The empire he boasted about wasn't built on brilliance. It was built on lies and exploitation. To strengthen my case, I reached out to one of his former investors, a man who had lost a significant amount of money when one of Vincent's projects mysteriously collapsed. At first, he was reluctant to talk, wary of the drama. But when I showed him what I already had, he agreed to give me testimony. "If this goes public," he said, "Vincent won't recover. He'll be ruined." "That's the point," I replied. Piece by piece, I assembled a mountain of evidence. Photos of him with his mistress, bank statements showing misused funds, emails proving his lies, witnesses willing to testify, contracts exposing his fraudulent practices. By the time I was done, my files were so thorough that no lawyer in the state would dare take his side. And still, I wanted more. I wanted to look him in the eye and watch the moment he realized I had outsmarted him. So I staged another meeting, pretending I was considering reconciliation. This time, I came prepared with a small recorder hidden in my bag. When we met, Vincent was smug again, thinking his charm was working. He rambled about how we could rebuild together, how the past could be forgiven, how I should do the right thing as his wife. Then, in a moment of arrogance, he admitted everything. "I made mistakes, yes," he said, sipping his drink carelessly. "But who doesn't? I used the company funds, I had my fun. That doesn't change the fact that I built everything. You wouldn't have half of what you do without me." Every word was captured. Every arrogant confession sealed his fate. By the time I left that meeting, I no longer felt anger. I felt power. For the first time, the scales were balanced. I wasn't just the woman he betrayed. I was the woman who held his future in her hands. And the beauty of it all? He had no idea how much I had gathered. He thought he was still in control, still playing me like a pawn. But in reality, I had already won. Now it was only a matter of deciding how to use it. Revenge is never as simple as anger. Anger is reckless. It lashes out blindly, leaving openings for mistakes. But strategy? That is where true revenge is born. I didn't just want to hurt Vincent. I wanted to dismantle him piece by piece, ensuring that every word he ever threw at me came back like a blade against his own throat. By now, I had enough evidence to bury him in court. Photos, Financial records, testimonies, recordings. My arsenal was complete. But I wasn't going to rush straight to the judge. No, Vincent thrived on perception. He built his empire on the illusion of success, on the admiration of investors and the respect of peers. To truly destroy him, I had to strike not just at his finances, but at his pride, his reputation, the very foundation of his identity. The first part of my plan was subtle: leaks. Carefully placed whispers in the right circles. A conversation here. A file anonymously forwarded there. Nothing that pointed directly to me, but just enough to stir suspicion. Investors are like wolves. They can smell weakness from miles away. All I had to do was drop a hint, and they began to circle. The second part required allies. Over the years, I had built relationships with journalists, reporters who had covered some of my most high-profile cases. They trusted me, knew I didn't bring them empty stories. So when I hinted that a prominent businessman was not what he appeared to be, their interest ignited like fire on dry grass. I gave them just enough to dig. No names at first, no direct accusations. But I knew once they pulled at the threads, they'd uncover the rot I had already documented. Meanwhile, I prepared my legal strike. Quietly, I assembled my case into airtight filings, ready to be submitted the moment Vincent tried to play dirty in court. I worked with colleagues I trusted, lawyers who knew my resolve and respected my skill. We cross-checked every detail, leaving no room for technical loopholes. If Vincent thought he could delay the divorce, he was mistaken. Every day he hesitated was another day I strengthened my case. Still, I knew Vincent. He wouldn't go down quietly. He would fight, claw, manipulate, anything to protect what little remained of his empire. That's why the third part of my plan was psychological. I arranged one more meeting with him, presenting myself as hesitant, almost sympathetic. I let him believe I was still conflicted, that maybe I hadn't truly moved on. He leaned into it, trying to charm me, to remind me of the years we had spent together. But beneath the surface, I was studying him, testing him, watching every word. And then, when his guard was down, I casually mentioned the prenup. The way his face paled told me everything. He had forgotten, or hoped I had. That clause, his arrogance in drafting it, was now my sword. "Vincent," I said sweetly, "you insisted on the prenup. You insisted that infidelity would cost you half your business. Well, you cheated, and I have proof." He stammered, tried to laugh it off, but the fear was there. I left that meeting knowing he would spend sleepless nights scrambling for a way out. And the beauty of it was that there was none. The final part of my plan was timing. Timing, in both law and life, is everything. I waited until the rumors about him were swirling, until his investors were growing restless, until his mistress had abandoned him and his confidence had cracked. Then, and only then, would I strike with full force. I envisioned it clearly. The courtroom filled with silence as I laid out every piece of evidence, the reporters scribbling furiously, the judge's eyes narrowing as Vincent's lies unraveled. I saw his mask fall, his bravado crumble, the world finally seeing him for what he truly was, a fraud, a coward, a man undone by his own hubris. But beyond the courtroom, I wanted something deeper. I wanted him to feel what I had felt. Small, powerless, invisible. For years, he had made me question my worth. Now, I wanted every glance in his direction to remind him that he had lost, not just his business, but the respect of everyone who once admired him. Some might say it was cruel, that I should simply walk away, let him destroy himself. But I knew Vincent. Left alone, he would crawl back, rebuild, and find another woman to break. I wasn't just avenging myself. I was ensuring he could never hurt anyone else the way he hurt me. The plan was set, the pieces aligned. All that remained was the execution. And as I reviewed my evidence one last time, a calmness settled over me. This wasn't rage anymore. This was justice. When the day came, I would be ready. Vincent thought he was the predator, the king of his world. But soon, he would learn that I was the storm he never saw coming. The day of the hearing arrived like a storm rolling in, inevitable, heavy, and impossible to ignore. The courtroom was packed, not only with lawyers and clerks, but with curious onlookers, reporters hungry for scandal, and a handful of Vincent's remaining associates, who still clung to the hope that their golden boy could somehow wriggle free. They didn't know what was coming. They didn't know that today would be the day their idol fell from his pedestal. Vincent entered the room in his tailored suit, chin high, mask firmly in place. He scanned the crowd as if still expecting admiration. But there was a flicker in his eyes, a shadow of fear he couldn't hide from me. He looked at me as though I was the enemy he had underestimated for far too long. And he was right. The judge called the case to order. Vincent's lawyer, a fresh face I hadn't seen before, began with a rehearsed speech about Vincent's accomplishments, his contributions, his supposed devotion to his marriage. The arrogance made me want to laugh. They were trying to paint him as a victim, a misunderstood businessman dragged into unnecessary drama. Then it was my turn. I stood, calm and collected, my documents neatly stacked, my voice steady. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. Instead, I began to lay out the facts, each one striking like a hammer. Your Honor, my client, Mr. Vincent, not only violated the sanctity of our marriage, but also the terms of a legally binding prenuptial agreement. As stipulated, infidelity results in the forfeiture of half his business assets to me. I have here irrefutable proof of his infidelity, misuse of company funds, and repeated dishonesty. Gasps rippled through the room. Vincent shifted in his seat, his lawyer's confident expression faltering. I displayed the photographs. Vincent and his mistress in luxury hotels, on vacations he claimed were business trips. Then came the bank statements showing funds siphoned from company accounts into personal spending. I read aloud excerpts from his own emails, instructing staff to cover his tracks. And finally, the recording, his own voice admitting to everything, dripping with arrogance. Each piece of evidence was another strike, another crack in the carefully constructed facade he had built. By the time I was finished, there was no mask left to wear. Vincent sat there pale, sweating, eyes darting wildly as the walls closed in. The judge's face hardened. Reporters scribbled furiously, their headlines practically writing themselves. Investors whispered angrily in the gallery. The proud businessman was no longer a titan. He was a liar, a cheat, a man undone by his own ego. Vincent tried to protest. He stood, his voice trembling with rage. This is slander. She's twisting everything. I built that business. I made everything we had. She's nothing without me. But his words only sealed his fate. The judge silenced him, reminding him that the evidence spoke louder than his outbursts. His lawyer looked defeated, shoulders sagging as though he already knew the case was lost. As I sat back down, I caught Vincent's eyes. For the first time, he looked small, powerless. The man who once towered over me with insults and cruelty now crumbled under the weight of his own lies. The ruling was swift. The prenup was upheld. Half of his business assets were awarded to me. His credibility as a businessman was shattered, his reputation left in ruins. The room buzzed with disbelief, but I felt only calm satisfaction. Justice wasn't loud or violent. It was precise, cutting, and absolute. When the gavel struck, Vincent's empire cracked beyond repair. Walking out of that courtroom, the flash of cameras surrounded me. Reporters shouted questions, investors scowled at Vincent, and whispers filled the air. But I walked with my head high, not as the betrayed wife, but as the woman who refused to be silenced. Vincent had once told me I was nothing without him. That day proved the opposite. He was nothing without me. And now the whole world knew it. The courtroom verdict was only the beginning. The real consequences unfolded slowly, like watching a proud tower collapse brick by brick, until nothing but dust remained. And Vincent, once the man who believed he was untouchable, was forced to face the wreckage of his own making. The first blow came from the investors. The very men who once applauded him at banquets, toasted his so-called brilliance, and signed deals with smiles now turned their backs. They withdrew their money, pulled out of projects, and publicly condemned him. Without their funding, his company, already fragile, fell into freefall. Contracts were canceled, offices downsized, and employees who once feared him began to gossip openly about his downfall. Then came the mistress. The glamorous woman he had flaunted like a prize vanished almost overnight. Rumors swirled. Some said she left for another wealthy man. Others whispered she was disgusted to discover Vincent's wealth had been hollow all along. Either way, she stopped taking his calls, blocked his number, and left him alone in the ruins of the life he destroyed to impress her. The man who once mocked me for not being enough was now abandoned by the very woman he thought was better. But fate wasn't done with him yet. Without his business empire to sustain him, his lavish mansion became a burden. He could no longer keep up with the mortgage payments or the endless maintenance costs. One by one, his possessions disappeared. The luxury cars sold off, the art collections auctioned, the house itself foreclosed. Vincent, who once looked down on me for visiting my modest family home, now found himself renting a cramped apartment in a part of town he had once sneered at. And then came the health. Stress carved itself into his face like sharp lines. His once sharp suit and tie appearance reduced to a man hunched over, his hair thinning, his skin pale. I heard whispers that he'd developed ulcers, that he was barely sleeping, that the weight of shame and financial ruin gnawed at him every waking moment. For someone who had thrived on appearances, his deteriorating body was the cruelest punishment of all, because now even the mirror mocked him. Socially, he became a pariah. Invitations stopped arriving, friends stopped calling, and those who once flocked to him for status now avoided him like the plague. He couldn't step into a restaurant without whispers following him. That's the man who lost everything to his wife. That's the fraud. That's the fool who thought he was above the law. The humiliation was relentless, and this time there was no escape. For years, Vincent had told me I was nothing, that without him, I would fade into obscurity. But now it was he who faded, he who shrank into the background, irrelevant and forgotten. As for me, I thrived. I managed my share of the business wisely, appointing professionals who turned chaos into order. The profits grew, my name was celebrated, and the contrast between us was undeniable. I bought a new home, not as a trophy, but as a sanctuary, filled with warmth and freedom. Every headline that celebrated my victories was another nail in his coffin, another reminder that he had lost not just to me, but to his own arrogance. I could have pitied him. I could have softened my heart, offered him a lifeline. But I remembered every insult, every night I cried alone, every moment he made me feel small, and I felt nothing but satisfaction watching karma strip him of everything he once held dear. The consequences weren't just financial, they were personal, emotional, physical, and social. Vincent wasn't simply ruined, he was erased. And in that erasure, I found my closure. People often ask me if I regret anything. If I regret the years wasted, the tears shed, the pain endured. And my answer is simple. No. Because those years forged the woman I am today. They taught me resilience, sharpened my instincts, and showed me that strength is not found in silence, but in rising when someone tries to break you. Vincent thought he had destroyed me. In truth, he built me. Every insult became fuel, every betrayal became a lesson, and every attempt to silence me only made my voice louder. Today, I live free, successful, unshaken, and untouchable. While he hides in the shadows of his downfall, I walk proudly in the light of my triumph. But this isn't just about me. This is a reminder for anyone listening. You are never as powerless as they want you to believe. Sometimes, the greatest revenge is not shouting, not screaming, but showing the world who you truly are when the mask falls off your enemy. If my story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, because there are many more stories like mine, and you won't want to miss what comes next.